What did you say?
We're right in the time.
How so?
We're right in the, we just passed this in the Parshat Shul.
Well, past what? We're up to
Oh, no,
Vigash.
sorry, we're almost there.
Yeah, we'll see. Sometimes we end up missing the week of that week's parsha somehow. Okay, so we're up to Perek Mem Dalid Posuk Mem Aleph, which is actually pretty remarkable. We'll get to this soon. This pasuk is the beginning of an aliyah, but it's actually the middle of a sentence. Pretty interesting phenomenon. But let's read the pasuk. V'hoya kir oisai ki ein hanar. When he, my father, will see that the youth is ein v'meis. So now this business of seeing follows pasuk chav ches, ulay ve'isiv adheino. And Yaakov is always waiting to see Yosef. And when he sees him, he says, Ra'oifa nechaloi filolti. And he also says, Amusa hapam acharei ra'oisi panecha, because there's two kinds of death. There's the death that's described in this pasuk, that if he's raya ki ein hanar, and then he's going to die biyogain, also called bira'a. And then there's the death that he could accept, which is the death that occurs after he sees Yosef's face. And this is all contrast to them being warned, the brothers that is, being warned that they can't see Yosef's face in Pasuk Chav Gimel. So there's this theme of who sees whom. Now, back to what I was saying before, that this pasuk is really a continuation of the sentence of the prior pasuk, because the prior pasuk already says that when we come back to our father, to my father, and the youth is not with us, and then he'll see Ke'ein Hanar. What is that adding? It already says in Pasuk Lamed, when I return and the Nar is not with us. So what is it adding that he's going to see what? It says Ke'ein Hanar. It already says Hanar Einenu Itanu. But there's a big difference because Pasuk Lamed says we're going to return and the Nar is not with us. Pasuk Lamed Aleph says that he's going to see that as categorically Ein Hanar, not Ein Hanar Itanu. So it's a continuation of Pasuk Lamed because Pasuk Lamed says like this. When we return to our father, to my father, your servant, and the youth is not with us, since his nefesh is kshuv nafshay, therefore he's going to react emotionally, and he's going to look at this and say, Ein hanar, v'meis. So we're not going to have a chance to convince him that he's still alive, he's just not with us. He's going because nafshek shuva nafshe, therefore he's going to perceive that ein hanar. Just like he said, Yosef einenu, Shimon einenu. He's always Yaakov is always quick to say they're gone, and that's the pasuk saying here also that we're going to return and he's not with us. Nafshek shuva nafshe, and therefore he's going to immediately decide ein hanar and mace because nafshek shuva nafshe. So if he thinks that he's gone, then he will naturally die as well because they're bound together. And also this picks up, of course, when Yosef was lost by Yemo'el Hisnachim, the idea that we can't influence him. Here too, there's one perspective that Yehuda has, that Tanari Nenu Itanu. But he knows that going back to Yaakov is going to immediately assume the worst, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it. Okay, ki avdecha aravas hana'ar me'im avi lemar. This is like it says earlier that Yehuda said anachi arvenu im loy avi enu elecha v'chatasi la'avi kol hayamim. That's also a quote from earlier, what he said to Yaakov. Va'ato yeshev no avdecha tachas hana'ar. So yeshev, let me stay. This yeshev means to remain, to stay. Tachas hana'ar eved la'adoni. Va'na'ar ya'al im echov. So he's offering to be an eved, and this is, as we discussed in the previous year, that the whole conversation is revolving around servitude, bondage. Yosef was sold into Avdus, and now Yehuda is offering to be equal to Yosef in his experience, that is.
You make a comparison to becomes king too?
Right. So there's this... it's necessary to become king to first be an Eved. And if Rechavam would have only accepted that, then there wouldn't have been the split. Because he was advised by his Zakanim not to act like a nar, essentially, and rather to realize that to be a good king, you have to be an effective king, you have to be an eved. And that's the theme that ultimately brings Yosef and Yehuda together, because it puts Yosef's suffering in a new light, because essentially his suffering was really his preparing him for his rise to greatness, because in order to be a king, you have to be an eved. And Yehuda, when he essentially steps up and takes responsibility and offers to be an eved, he's recognizing the same phenomenon, and that puts Yehuda and Yosef on the same page, figuratively, and that's we're ready for them to have their rapprochement, which is revolving around kingship, of course, right? So now he's introducing a note of emotional note, and to pull on Yosef's heartstrings, saying, "I can't. How would I ascend to my father with the nar and the nar is not with me? Pen erev arasha yimtzas avi." This reminds me of the pasuk in Esther where she says, "Echacha uchal v'ra'isi bara'ah asher yimtza liyatzas ami." Here it's Eich el avi pen erev arasha yimtzas ami as avi. There she says Echacha uchal, and so Eich ela is basically like Echacha uchal, and notably the next pasuk begins V'lo yochel Yosef. So Yehuda's in a situation where his emotions, he's saying, my emotions are overcoming. There's something that I don't find within myself to do. It's too overwhelming for me to consider such a thing, possibility. And Yosef too now is gripped by forces that are more powerful than him. So Yehuda's the reminiscence of the allusion, association with that pasuk in Esther, brings us to the uchal, not being able to do something, and then Perek Memhei begins. So pen, just a word on the last part of the pasuk Lamed Daled. Pen erev arasha yimtzas avi. This we've noted a few times. This is essentially the response to Yosef, who offered them alula sholem el avichem, and this is the climax of Yehuda's argument: is that's impossible. You're offering us something which is impossible to be achieved, because you're telling us it's just you and your father will have shalom. It's not true. There will not be shalom al Yisrael. As the pasuk says, shalom al Yisrael. He has to see his children, he has to see his grandchildren, in order to have the true shalom, for Yisrael to have shalom. Yisrael and Shamalis, the Medrash is Yisrael Saba. And the offer of Alula Shalom al Avicham is essentially a false offer, because it's not going to be shalom, it's going to be ra'ah. Okay. Perek Memhei. V'lo yochel Yosef l'his apek. L'choil hanitzavim olav. Okay, this is actually a difficult pasuk. We have to translate what is lehis apek lechol hanitzav malav. So we know what lehis apek means from the same story, where the same narrative in Perek Mem Gimel pasuk Lamed Aleph. There it says Vayirchatz Yosef was overwhelmed by compassion for his brothers. Vayirchatz panav, so he went into a room to privately cry in private. Vayirchatz panav vayetzi, then he washed his face and left. Vayis apak. So he got a grip. He got a hold of himself. He steeled himself. He steeled his emotions. So then in this pasuk too, we would say, okay, he could no longer control himself. Okay. He was no longer in control of his emotions. But what is l'chol hanitzavim olav? Or then another question we could ask is, why would he be in control? Well, earlier, we know why he wanted to be in control, because he didn't want to give it away. Here, if he's giving it away and he's saying who he is, so what's the pasuk saying about, he couldn't control himself? And if he could, what would have been different? So some people read this like this. I think it's a Yosef b'chor shar. It's a big problem. I mean, what's the sequence? What's the hemshech? So Yosef b'chor shar reads it like this. Again, if assuming his apik means to stay strong, which is, again, what it sounds earlier, and unless you want to read Noob Shatim into that, which I think Rashi does, Narban is critical for that reason, because he says, no, this apik means to have self-composure, have control over yourself. So if you want to read it mean to have control over yourself, what does l'chol hanitzavim olav mean? So Yosef b'chor shar says, he could not control himself, and therefore, l'chol hanitzavim olav he called, which is very strange to read the
He didn't
pasuk.
want them to see.
So 1 second. So now right. So he couldn't control himself. Therefore, he was about to have an outburst, which is the next pasuk says, "V'yitnes kol b'v'chi," and because of that, he wanted to call them out. But that's not. It still doesn't explain the lamed. I mean, he's basically breaking apart the pasuk. But there's a simple way to read that. I think which you're getting at. V'lo yachol Yosef lisapek, which would have been appropriate. In other words, Yosef is ready to tell them, "Ani Yosef." Had he been able to do that with self-control, without breaking out into great loud sobbing, then he would have kept everyone in the room. Because given that he's in the presence of all these Nitzav Malav, it's appropriate for him to have control and not to display this the side of himself, this vulnerable side. So you have to read this as like a subordinate clause, meaning "V'lo yachol Yosef lisapek," which would have been the appropriate way for him to behave, given that there was many people in his court, and they're his servants or they're his ministers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, due to "V'lo yachol Yosef lisapek," due to which would have demanded a kind of behavior of control. Now, the lamed in the Tanakh is actually quite complicated. So, but yeah, I think it could do that. I think I'm not sure. I don't know my biblical syntax well enough. But I think it's actually the fact that it's like. I think the bigger problem is that this is like a subordinate clause, meaning that it's explaining why he would have been misapik. I think that's not derech hamikra. I don't know. I know. I'm completely very little about that. Akapanim, that's one way to read this pasuk, which some people do. Ibn Ezra, I think, almost says this. Akapanim, that's how I would suggest that. So we're reading the pasuk like this. Yosef is now about to do something, which, given that he's in the presence of a whole court that's of his servants, he wants to be in control. But he can't. He can't be in control. And therefore, he says, "Vayikro hitziu chol ish me'aloi, v'lo omad ish es Yosef." So as we said, Yehuda starts getting very emotional at the end and says it's something I cannot do, and Yosef too falls into that same spirit of being very emotional and being unable to do something. Okay, now what's the significance of
because he sees Yehuda doing what he was hoping him to do, or perhaps because he sees some sort of kinship.
Yeah, that could be right. Exactly, but we'll see. There's also something else which we touched about in the past. We're going to explore that further. That Yosef heard something that was very new to him. Okay, we'll get to that. Yeah, but simply you could say right because Yehuda cares for Binyamin, and Yosef now recognizes that maybe Yehuda could potentially care for Yosef as well, or because, like you said, cares for his father, and he's doing the same that Yosef himself. He's basically validating Yosef's experience, as we said, because he's offering to be an Eved. Mm-hmm. Yes, all that. But there's more. So we'll get to, there's another point also. What's the significance of this pasuk that no one was there? Okay? So I want to show you this expression of nitzavim alav regarding a king, such as Yosef, appears to by the king Shaul. Okay? And in the context of his contention, shall we say, with David. And this is something we've been noticing, that Nafshoy Kshur ben Nafshoy and Nefesh Yonasan Kshur ben Nefesh David. And we had another one also. What was that again? Right. Whether it's possible to go to the Plishti, and whether the Nar Binyamin could leave his father, and David was sent from his father. Kids, we spoke about all these parallels. And further in that story, when Shaul is trying to kill David, so we look in Shmuel Aleph Perek Chof Beis. So Shmuel Aleph Perek Chof Beis, I first want to point out over here the story where Shaul is sitting under the tree, and Shmuel Aleph Perek Chof Beis pasuk Vav V'chol Avir Dov Nitzavim Alav. Okay, but first I want to just point out it keeps on repeating Nitzavim Alav. The next pasuk, Shaul says to Avodav Hanitzavim Alav, all you bnei Yemini, you're on David's side, and you're rebelling against me. And then pasuk tes, Vayan doeg ha'adoim v'hu nitzav alav de Shaul. Okay, so he's nitzav on the avodim. So I don't even know what that means, because nitzavim alav about the avdei Shaul means they are serving him. Doeg, see here it sounds like he's saying he was higher than them. So it sounds like nitzav al has two different meanings, which are contradictory, sort of, right? Because nitzav alav first means to serve him, and here nitzav alav means that he's over them. Although actually, come to think of it, maybe the two things go together, as we've been discussing. To rule over someone is to have something that he needs to serve him. Like maybe that's it might be relevant to this. Okay, and then so we know the story. So Shaul accuses the Bnei Yemini, Shimuna Bnei Yemini accuses them of being on David's side, taking David's side against him. And okay, then Doeg steps up and he says, "No, I'll tell you. I'm going to give you some information." And he tells them about Achimelech taking care of David. And then look at pasuk Zayin. So Shaul summons Achimelech, and pasuk Zayin says, "V'yom ha'melech l'rotzim hanitzavim alav." Again, the fourth time we have this expression hanitzavim alav. And what does he tell them? To go do his bidding and kill the Kahanim, but they refused. Okay? So here we have this great repetition of the Nitzavim Alav, who are ostensibly supposed to be doing his bidding and supposed to be faithful to him, loyal to him, and protect him, and he accuses them of Dafka supporting his adversary. And then there's one Nitzav Alav Doeg who actually does Shaul's bidding, or Nitzav Alav de Shaul, okay? And then the Ratzim Hanitzav Malav, who Shaul expects to protect him and do what he needs to do to his enemies, refuse to do so. Okay. So let's think about an our story. So based on this parallel, Nitzav Malav are people that protect the king. And Shaul is feeling that those who are supposed to be protecting him are not. And indeed, some of them are not willing to go that far to protect him. Doeg is, but the other ones are not. They're not going to kill the Kahanim. And Doeg, of course, goes out and does so. So there's this tension. And you read Shaul that those psukim in Shmuel, those psukim are pointing to the question of whether Shaul has loyal forces or not in his competition with David. Bringing it back to our story, we have Yosef and the competition between him and Yehuda. And Yosef is very powerful. He's king of Mitzrayim, but he's only as powerful as his security detail. And when he tells everyone to leave, so he's making himself vulnerable to them. Just like Shaul said, "Oh, you Bnei Yemini, you're not on my team. You're on Yehuda's David's team." Here too, Binyamin, who's in play between Yosef and Yehuda, there's a possibility that nobody is supportive of Yosef. And just like all the brothers originally were out to kill Yosef, now that Yosef makes himself the most vulnerable ever, because he loses all his Secret Service agents left the room, this is a very vulnerable, intense moment. And basically, this is exactly what the Medrash says. This is why the Medrash reads this, that the Medrash says, in that moment, had the Shvatim wanted, they could have killed him. Had they wanted, they could have ganged up and killed him. That's, I think, the point of the pasuk. By saying, Yosef was in a situation where he couldn't act in a way that he needed to, according to the dignity of his office, and nonetheless, he was willing to lose the security of having all the people that would be protecting him against his antagonists, represented Bereisha by Yehuda, which we see picks up again by Shaul when he's vulnerable to his enemy from Yehuda, and accuses the Bnei Yemini of not being loyal to him. But in this story of Yosef, where Yosef, I think there's the irony going on in the Shaul story that Yosef, of course, we have this whole theme of this fight between the brothers, which picks up to Yehuda and Yisrael, David and Shaul. And as we've been pointing out the parallels. So in the Yosef story, Yosef is willing to not have Nitzav Malav because he wants Shalom between him and his brothers, and then he does not need that protection. In the Shaul story, where Shaul is actually seeking to fight against David, the Nitzav Malav end up not coming to his aid. So that's what the Psukim in Shmuel are doing, I think.
funny that you're making a parallel between the confrontation between Yehuda and Yosef over Binyamin,
right?
The confrontation between the Melech from Binyamin,
right?
And the Melech from Yehuda.
Correct, but it's interesting. So that's why I pointed out that he says Shimuna b'nei Yemini.
Yes.
So it's interesting. Why is he calling them that? What's that about? Is that Shimuna b'nei Yemini? You should be listening to me because you're b'nei Yemini. Because usually Shimuna b'nei Yemini, it sounds like a derogatory, like he's like putting them down. But yet he's a Benjamin himself. So I don't know. That's why it sounds like maybe the b'nei Yemini have this possibility of being on Yehuda's side, which we know that's true.
Yeah.
Although, as you said, Shalom himself is from Benjamin's. But it does seem like there's this, at least possibility that the b'nei Yemini, which is exactly what Shaul says, that the children of Binyamin, as Benjaminites have this potential of going over to Yehuda. Possibility of going to Yehuda. Okay, so that's the point over here. So Yosef is now making himself vulnerable to their harm. And like I said, also it's possible that Binyamin will be on Yehuda's side. He might not even have Binyamin, meaning we know that the 10 brothers were opposed to him, at least going back to the beginning of Vayeshev. And for all we know, they might still be, and everything is and they don't really mean what they're saying, right? For all Yosef knows.
But they're saying where?
Oh, well, Yehuda's... Oh, I guess, I mean, they never even said they're not. Right. Okay, yeah, sorry, right. For all Yosef knows, the brothers still have the same position of Yosef is a bad guy, and we should have left him in the pit, and it was a mistake that we even sold him, whatever. And now that they found him, and he says, "Ani Yosef," they'll be like, okay, let's finish this off. Let's finally finish this off. Right, exactly. Yeah, I didn't realize that.
They did say to each other.
You're right, Av Moshe Banach. Right, oh, okay.
Did he know about that?
Yeah, because that's what made him cry, right?
That's right, he cries, and then he does it. So you're saying that maybe he doesn't realize that.
Right.
He's not sure that
he cried. Right, so Yosef knows that they feel guilty. Okay. Right. Well, right, but that's the thing. But remember, it's very interesting. I have to go back to that because now I realize, we said, this is amazing. They were guilty because they didn't listen to his cries. Yeah. And, which we discussed, Yosef's claim on the brothers was Shimuna. Yeah. He never had a claim, that was his whole claim on them. Not that they were necessarily wrong about their position, but they had to give him a hearing. Mm-hmm. And they have to listen to his what's going on in him. And that was the discussion over there, which, by the way, this is interesting, the Shimuna b'nei Yemini. I'm wondering if that has any, because the Shimuna is a big expression in the story. But anyways, all right, so that's something interesting to think about, that in this, but they only said they're guilty because we didn't listen to his cries. They didn't say they didn't regret their position that Yosef is someone who deserves death. Okay. So in this case, when he begins to cry, all he knows is that
they'll hear.
They'll listen. And it's interesting, it says Vayishmu Mitzrayim Vayishma Beis Parin. Okay, did they hear? Did they hear? Right. And it's obvious they heard because they were in the same room, whatever. But given this background that we're pointing out now, that all he knows is, and that's all they said, is that they were guilty for not listening. Right? Vayishma Reuven, right? So the other Reuven was Shimei. We have to go back to that. That's really important to understand that better. In light of this tension, which is right, it's a very serious tension. You're right. I didn't think about it deeply enough. It's a very serious point that their position didn't change. The only thing that changed was that they were guilty for not listening to him. What would we expect them to do now, right? We would expect them to listen, or we would expect them to recognize that they misunderstood something fundamental. But what's going to make them change, right? Right, we have to figure that out. Okay.
So there is some risk, you're saying, he doesn't know.
Major risk that he's now without any security. A king has to have his nitzavim of always, and certainly when he's facing these gang of people that he's threatening, and certainly given that they proven in the past that they want to at least exile him, if not worse. Okay. Good. And so he was lo yachal his apik, and as we said, so therefore he puts himself at risk, and they could have harmed him, but then we have in pasuk gimel lo yachlu echav lanes oisei, that he was unable due to his great emotion to control himself, and they too were unable to put up a response. And I want to show you that. Meaning they were overcome. They were overcome with something, with emotion, right? And let's say had they not, everyone was overcome with emotion in this story, and it ends with Yehuda saying, "How can I?" As we said, how can I go to my father? It's a very emotional statement, and in Esther it says, "I'm not able." Something I'm unable to do. Yosef is unable to control himself, and the brothers also are unable to compose themselves and respond. So I want to show you in Micha Perek Gimel, a perek that we've been looking at a lot. I want to show you this theme about not being able to respond and being full of shame. And that perek will also tell us, Shimuna, exactly. It starts with Shimuna Rashi Beis Yaakov, Ksina Beis Yisrael, something we spoke about. In fact, the Medrash says in the beginning of Vayeshev that Shimuna, Yosef is saying, this is what the Nevi'im are going to tell you, Shimuna, because in Perek Gimel of Micha, what it says is Shimuna, the people of Yaakov who abuse the poor and eat their flesh and skin them alive, which is basically what they did to Yosef. Right? Okay. And then it says in Pasuk Dalid that if you do that, then Hashem will not be oineh. V'lo ya'aneh oisam. So there's no aniyah from Hashem. And then in Pasuk Zayin it says, okay, let's continue. Pasuk Hey talks about the Nevi'im that lead people astray. So the theme about the Nevi'im, the brothers think they're Nevi'im, but they end up losing their Nevuah, because it says they call Shalom, but they declare war against someone who doesn't feed them. So that's like the brothers who couldn't speak to Yosef b'Shalom, instead declared war against him. And he doesn't feed them. Well, he does, but it revolves. No, the point is, but it revolves around food, right? It revolves around food, and he's threatening that he's going to have power over them around food, and they'd say, okay, they're declaring war against him, and because that says Pasuk Vav, they're going to lose their Nevuah. It's going to become dark, and the sun is going to set. And I think we said this is one of the illusions of the dream of the sun and the moon bowing, is that the sun is setting on the Nevi'im, which is the brothers. And then Pasuk Zayin says the Chayzim and the Kaisim are going to be full of have Busha and Chafru, and they're going to cover their lips or their mouths, and from words, and they're not going to have what to say anymore, Ki'in ma'an Elokim, because there's no word from Hashem. If there's no word from Hashem and you're a Navi, then you have nothing to say. You're full of shame. But I am full with the Ruach Hashem, like Yosef had the Ishish Ruach Lekim. And what does Ruach Hashem tell him? That he could speak out what's the Pesha and Chatas of Yaakov and Yisrael, which is, again, Shimuna, the next pasuk, that you corrupt Mishpat, etc. Okay? So it's a beautiful references to Yosef. You notice in Pasuk Yiraf, Lo Savei Aleinu Ra'ah, is something we spoke about a lot also. And Vayigash Yehuda, here he's approaching the Ra. He's not saying the Ra won't come to me. Fine. What's my point? That first of all, because of shame, kinivhalu. Here we have in Pasuk Zayin and Micha, Boishu and Chafru in ma'ana likim. And as I said, Nevi'im who can't speak, it means there's no response from God. Same thing. And significantly, what do they say when they could speak? They say Shalom, but to the person which is the word of the Nevi'im, the big word of the Nevi'im is Shalom. And that's the word that this whole story is revolving around. Le'yachlu daber l'shalom, right? And then Yosef says Shalom Parei, and Yosef says Alu l'shalom alavichem. And that's the word of the Nevi'im, and the whole story revolves around Devar Hashem, Das Hashem. And if you don't, but they're fake Nevi'im, they're not true Nevi'im because they declare war against the wrong kind of person, the one who's not supporting them or giving them to eat. So, in this story, they declared war against Yosef. Had they been able to respond to Yosef in at this point in time where he's telling them on the Yosef, what would they have said? They would have said the same thing they said in the beginning of Yosef. So, but they lose their mana. They lose their mana because if they took the wrong term, then they're no longer able to say what they used to say, which was Kitru Allah Muhammad, to the wrong kind of person. So therefore, and only he says to them, the Pesha and Chatas is Atem Achartem Moisi and Yosef Achim Hashem Chatem Moisi. He's the only one who's able to speak. Because he's, from his perspective, he's not the one who was Pesha and Chayte. So they can't speak. He's the one who's calling them out for the chait and telling Ani Yosef Achim Hashem Chatem Moisi. So he's the one who's able to speak with the Ruach Elokim that he has within him. They lost their ability to speak, but my point is, like I said, what did they speak the first time? They didn't speak Shalom to Yosef, said they spoke Machama. So had they been able to continue speaking, they would have said, okay, let's resume the Muhammad. But Layachlu Echav Lanais is because they lost the word of Hashem. They can't speak, and therefore that's right. For now we get the Shalom. Okay, finally the Shalom. They can't speak, they can't declare war, so only Yosef's left speaking, and he says, you guys did something very bad. But it's okay, we can work it out. Okay.
She speaks strongly even here.
Well, yeah, I mean, he says they're Pashan Chatas, but somehow it works out. So I guess probably we have to go to the next pack of Micha to see how. I would imagine, that's a prediction, that the next pack of Micha would have to... Exactly, of course. But I'm saying is that...
So it's really not... It's really shalom.
It's really?
It's all shalom because it's Dvar Hashem.
Yeah, of course, all that. Yeah. Oh, yes. Okay. The next parak in Micha Parak Dalet talks about those who don't understand the Machshavas Hashem. So I was just saying that. Of course, we could read it over here, but I imagine that Micha will continue that. We spoke about this. Machshavas Hashem are when the ways of Hashem are beyond human comprehension, and therefore humans can't live in accordance with God's plan because there be Machshavas Hashem. It says in Micha Parak Dalet, and Yirmiyah is full of that idea. Okay, I want to point out something which seems interesting. I'm not sure if it's a parallel, but it's interesting. Shmuel Beis, Perek Gimel, Pasuk Yud Aleph, since we're on the theme of the house of David and the house of Shaul, so, and whether they'll be going to be separate or united. So here, after the death of Shaul, there's the question of the faithful remnants, the ones who are loyal to the house of Shaul, whether they're going to join David. And Avner, who is the Sartzava for Ishbaishas, right? So he says like this. So basically, this is in Perek Gimel. Avner, Ishbaishas charges him with being boiled the Pelegish of Shaul, and he gets really upset, and he says, that's it, I'm going over to David. And Pasuk Yud Aleph says, V'lo yochol oid lahashav es Avner davar me'yir asay oisay. So Ishbaishas was not able to respond. Okay, so this inability to respond and causes Avner to go over to the house of David. So I'm just making this tushtel that they couldn't speak, and that's when they reunited. And also, Avner was not able to be Meshiv Dover. That's what we're waiting for in this whole story is Vahashiveni Dover. And the Dover to be Meshiv, as we discussed, is as the wise elderly advisors told Rechavam how to be Meshiv Dover to tell them you'll be an Eved. So that's to be a king, you have to be able to be Meshiv Dover, the right Dover. And Avner is not able, Ishbaishas is not able to be Meshiv Dover, and now that's it. His kingdom is over, and it all unites under David. And then, two psukim later, so Avner sends a message to David saying, I want to bring everyone over to your side. And David says, good, we're going to be united. One condition, Lo sira es panai, you can't see my face unless you bring Michal Bashol. B'vayachal liris es panai. Again, liris es panai. So we have, in the story of Yosef, he says you can't come until Lo liris panai unless you bring Binyamin. And so Michal Bashol is like the Binyamin figure. And David says you can't see my face. What? We're united.
It's entirely different context.
Okay, fine. That's what you say. Perhaps.
Sure.
I don't know if it is. Yosef unites everything somehow. Okay. That's that for the psukim. Now I want to talk about something which we spoke about this in the past, and I'm pretty sure I said this in the shir. If I didn't say it in the shir, I said it at some point. But last week, credit to Ari Lam, who was ma'ir me to think about this again and gave it more clarity. Remind me if you heard this from me. Why did Yosef, the famous question, why did Yosef not tell Yaakov he's alive? So, yeah, did I ever speak about this? So I said, okay, so it goes like this. Basically, Yosef thought, I think I spoke about the fact that Yosef was done with the family and he's doing his own thing, but there's another point. I don't know if I said this. What?
But his father...
Right, I don't know if I spoke about that, but I don't know if I ever said this, but I definitely thought this. But again, I have to credit Ari Lam for saying some points, which I'll tell you which one specifically, and just getting me to think about this again, which is that Yosef thought that Yaakov was behind his sale. Because let's talk about the story from Yosef's perspective. His father, more than that, his father, Vayigar Aviv, he gets upset at him. Why are you having this dream? He sent him out to his brothers. Oh, go find out how they're doing it. And he gets his brothers, they take him and throw him into a pit. He didn't hear Terem Yikrav Aleim, they said, let's kill him, right? So all he knows is my father sent me out after getting upset at me for the dreams. Like my brothers were upset at me for the dreams. They're all on the same page. Except for Aviv Shamar Sadavar, which is something internal. No way Yosef would know that, right? All he knows is he's upset at him. What are you having these dreams for? What are you having this dream? Like his brothers are upset. He sends him to his brothers, sell him. So, and this business of a father rejecting his son has ample precedent. Yitzchak ultimately chose Yaakov over Esav. Avram sent away Ishmael. So, what? And Keturah. So the idea of we're selecting which son is going to be the one who continues the dynasty and follows the derech of the fathers is an old theme in this family. So you basically Yosef thinks he's the Esav, which actually is, as we discussed, that Yosef is the Cain figure. Now we go back even broader. There's always this tension between families and Bereshis. Cain and Hevel, Shem, Cham, and Yefes. Okay, from the children of Nachar, and then from Terach's children, and then it continues to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So, and indeed, Yosef is the figure who's taking care of the grain, like Cain, and corresponds to Esav, the Ishada, who brings food to his father, and Yosef is going to take care of food. A lot of these parallels we discussed. So, and Yosef, the deeper level, Yosef is the one who stands for not having Das Hashem or some other approach, which is not Jewish, which is why the brothers hate him. And he indeed is at home in Mitzrayim, and that's where he belongs in many ways. So fine, so good. Let's send him away. Very good. So Pashut, he thinks that his father sent him away. We spoke about this, I think, in the context of Menashe and Ephraim. He names his son Menashe because I forgot my base Avi, and that's okay. That's how he wants it. We spoke further about the fact that Yaakov blessed Ephraim and Menashe because they had been separated from the family, and they were named for the fact that Yosef was separate from the family. Okay, another thing about Yosef, we spoke about this too, that when the brothers tell him Hamoshel Timshal Banu, this reminds us of Avimelech in Sefer Shoftim. And remember, Yosef is called Avrech, which is Abel Malka. And Avimelech in the book of Shoftim, in Perek Tes, Pasuk Beis, says, what's better? HaMeshol b'chem shivim ish, Meshol b'chem ish echad. Do you want 70 people to rule over you, which is all the children of Gideon, or do you want just me? So Yosef here is standing in opposition to the Shivim b'nei Yaakov that are going to join him. Okay, he's one of them, but don't get too worked up about that. Don't get too technical there. But he stands in... What?
Maybe he doesn't know that yet.
Okay. But Akapanim, he stands in opposition to the idea that there's a unified Shivim Nefesh Yadav, Shivim Nefesh b'nei Yaakov, and instead he's the one. And that's what they're saying. Why would you rule over us? We're all equal. That's the Shivim of b'nei Yaakov stand for equality among b'nei Yisrael. And Yosef stands for this one person who is separate. Okay, so Yaakov brings him back. And this I credit to Ari Lam, that he says, when Yaakov asked Yosef to bury him in Mitzrayim, he says, Hishav Ali, Vayishav Ali. Which is, where do we have that? When he bought the Bechayr from Yosef, Hishav Ali Chayev, Vayishav Ali. So it's the same expression. So Yosef is like this Esav figure. Taka is an Esav figure, but he's nonetheless brought back. Yeah, okay. He's nonetheless not Muchar Gomer. He's nonetheless brought back in. And what's something to think about, this I started thinking about now, is, again, we notice this, but we have to really think about it more. That in a sense, the whole Bereshis is revolving around this, because it starts with this problem of Cain and Hevel brothers. Mm-hmm. And then there's again the selection between the three brothers, Shem, Cham, and Yefes. And then each family, they're kicking out a child, till the Bereshis ends with what? With Yosef and his brothers making peace, and Yosef is saying, and I'm going to go back with you. And Yosef is embalmed and put in an urn b'Mitzrayim, and now waiting to go back with Bnei Yisrael. Everyone together. So exactly. So it's as if the whole Bereshis, at least after Perek Aleph, Beis, and Gimel, is about, once we get to Perek Dalet, it's about this problem of what to do about this tension between man and his fellow man. How are we going to get a unified family? And the idea is, Bekitzer, we're not going to go chazer all these Yisaitis, but basically we have Cain and Hevel. And it starts after the Eitzadas. Why? Because after the Eitzadas, we have the reality of lacking the proper das, but also an awareness that we're supposed to have, theoretically, das toiv and chai la'olam. So man now has this tension within him, which is lines up along the two approaches of das and lack of das. Because neither of them are perfect, because we're supposed to have das toiv, but we don't. So what should we do? Should we pretend to have das, which is what Hevel does? He's a royet tzayin, as we discussed, even though back in Bereshis. It's a world of b'zeh sapech toich alechem, and Hevel is still not doing that, but still being royed b'tzayin, because he wants to pretend that he's still in Gan Eden, but he's not. And Cain embraces the ramifications of not having das toiv, and says, okay, b'zeh sapech alechem, no problem. But neither of those work, because those are two sides of the two have to somehow be reconciled. And what happens is they're not reconciled. Instead, you have one person stakes at one side, one person stakes at the other one, and that leads to bloodshed. Because man himself became divided, became imperfect, and not one with himself. And therefore, within you, that's what the story is continuing. Okay, man within himself has this division, and that then becomes manifest within two siblings, members of a family, and there's only going to be a possibility of the revelation of Hashem when this is resolved, and the family can put together these two aspects. So that's the great significance of the Yosef story, is that he is resolving this tension of those who know Hashem and those who don't know Hashem, and he's finding that even those who don't know Hashem and are involved with grain have a way. What?
But they have dreams. So they have some.
So exactly, they have dreams. That's what dreams must be doing. And this is, we have to think about this obviously very deeply. That chalomis are the solution to this. There's some maybe in between das and loyadati, of course, as we've been discussing.
But there's still.
And that's it. What?
Even the Navi said it's loyadati, but he still comes with das Hashem.
Which Navi?
Yaakov,
of course, right. Of course, there's always this tension between, and they have to be brought back together somehow. And Yosef can
sure. That's the end of the family,
because Yaakov unites them.
Yes.
They're all Kolon and Yaakov.
Bring back the das.
They're all Kolon and Yaakov. Yeah. So meaning even Yosef's Mahalach has its place within Yaakov. Yes. Okay, so that will be that. Shkoyach.